With this IMF story, Stanlib's chief economist, Lings, joining us now via Skype. Kevin, good morning and thank you very much for your time. I mean, misreaction this morning, just from an economic perspective, I just want to get your sense of it. When you got the news that finally IMF has approved this, what went through your mind?
Well, Dan, I think it's obviously not exactly a heartening thing anytime any country has to go to the IMF. If you look at all of the countries in the past that have had to access IMF funding, they always do that because they're under financial strain. So from that perspective, it has to be a negative. Obviously, you want to be able to fund yourself adequately within your domestic market. If you can't do that, then yes, you've got to access international finance. And obviously, if you're under more strain, then you have got the safety mechanism that you can go to the IMF. So it's not an ideal situation, but I think within the context where South Africa finds itself, the amount of money South African government has to borrow this year, the rapid deterioration in government finances, it's probably not a bad decision in the end because it lessens the pressure on South Africa to fund all of government's debt. So government already is borrowing a huge amount domestically. To put that into context, think about this. The government is borrowing more than R1 billion every single day, Saturdays and Sundays included, within the domestic economy. And the government still needs more money than that in order to fund itself. So if we say we don't want the IMF facility, where are we going to get that money? If we say we're going to get it domestically, we're already borrowing a huge amount domestically. So I think in the end, given the circumstances, this is one way of trying to find the additional finance.
Yeah, but I mean, just against the background of what you've just said and what we know that already government is owing a lot of money. This IMF loan is part of that 500 billion rand stimulus package the president announced a few months ago to tackle the issues arising out of COVID-19. I mean, we are going so much more into debt. The economy is shrinking. I mean, the purse itself that SARS can collect is going to be smaller than ever this year. People are losing jobs. Small and medium businesses are shutting down. One just has to wonder, are we heading towards a debt crisis?
At this stage, undoubtedly, if we stay in the current path, then we're heading to an outright financial crisis in South Africa. And that financial crisis is not far away. So the path that we're on, the fiscal spending, the lack of tax revenue, it's simply not sustainable. The Minister of Finance, I think, made that abundantly clear in the supplementary budget during June, saying that if South Africa doesn't change the way in which we manage government finances and obviously find a way to lift the economy, then clearly we're going to have that crisis.
And the IMF, I understand, we're still waiting for the details of the terms and conditions of this. We're told it's a soft loan, I think average 1.1% in terms of interest, still a lot of money, so it's not free money. But apparently IMF, from the reports I've seen, Kevin, has noted that the government will have to stabilize public debt through fiscal consolidation. We've heard that story before. The government will have to improve governance. We know what goes on year in and year out around governance issues. The Auditor General at pains all the time to point to irregular and wasteful expenditure, especially in local government. Governance is lacking there. And of course, the operations of our famous state-owned entities. And then how do you also implement growth-enhancing reforms? It seems to me it's like a tall order.
It's a massive task ahead. I agree with you wholeheartedly. The IMF facility tends to be a genuine soft loan. It's not free money. It's got to be repaid. There is a certain interest. There are certain conditions attached. But in terms of IMF facility, this is as easy as it gets. If you want to access further money, it comes with significant conditionality.
Kevin, it's as easy as it gets. Sorry to cut you in there. Although it's as easy as it gets, could there be penalties built in if you don't fulfill whatever terms and conditions that have been agreed upon currently?
Certainly there would be, but the key criteria here is that if you don't start to manage the economy well, which the government would have provided the IMF with a letter of undertaking. Now, it's just a letter, but it's an important letter because it tells the IMF of our intention to manage the fiscal situation way better. Now, let's say that we don't do that. All of those factors you highlighted. We've done this before, we've tried it before, it hasn't worked, we've got SOE debt. Let's say that we cannot bring this under control. Then what happens in the future is when we go back at any other point to the IMF when we ask for facilities, they simply become very skeptical about providing further assistance. So it's not as if the IMF can suddenly take away the money gets handed over, we have the money, but any further facilities are dependent on the way in which you manage this facility. So it would be incredibly unwise to not manage this appropriately. The other thing I just want to quickly mention is that the Minister of Finance, in his supplementary budget, made it clear that we've got to find a different path for South Africa. So it's abundantly evident that we're heading to this crossroads in South Africa. And if the government's not willing to implement these things, which they've spoken about and haven't done so far, if they're not willing to implement it, it's not just the IMF money that's going to become a problem. It's all the other debt that's going to become a huge problem. All of the money advanced by pension funds to government, all of that is going to be problematic, in which case we're going to have an outright fiscal crisis. So we're heading to a crunch time for South African government situation that we've got to change the direction with a high degree of urgency. If we're unwilling to do that, the implications are way beyond a simple IMF facility.
Yeah, and finally, Kevin, how important is it that we as tax-paying citizens get transparency from this? I mean, here's this big IMF loan to us, that 500 billion stimulus package. We know that the new development bank of BRICS has also lent us $1 billion towards the same facility. We know that the African Development Bank has loaned us 5 billion rand as well towards this. I don't know how much more is coming from private, local institutions and other international institutions. How important is transparency of all these packages so we know what we're really in for?
100%. We've got to have absolute transparency. In terms of the domestic funding, we have a high degree of transparency there because obviously the government borrows that money in the domestic market and the local participants need that transparency in order to advance government money. I'm expecting the same level of transparency regarding the IMF facility, so to disclose exactly what the terms and conditions are. It is critical that we know what we're getting ourselves into. We don't want to find ourselves going down the road and then find a whole lot of conditions have been agreed to but not revealed. So to me, over the next couple of days, I'm expecting to see National Treasury provide a significant amount of information as to how this facility will be repaid and also importantly how the money is going to be used. That's a critical factor.
And the transparency that's going to be needed. I mean, currently news coming out of Gauteng here with all the PPE scandal that we're hearing about and the MEC for Health implicated there, and the husband of the spokesperson of the presidency, Ms. Kusela Diko as well. So it's going to be important to get transparency on all fronts. Thank you very much, Kevin Lings, the Stanlib's chief economist, with some insights regarding the IMF loan.